The loyalist ceasefire is under extreme pressure. If loyalist paramilitary activity continues, there will be growing demands on the government to expel the loyalist fringe parties from the talks at Stormont, and that doesn't augur well for the peace process as a whole. Tom Coulter, BBC News, Belfast.
The two British nurses accused of murdering a colleague in Saudi Arabia have retracted confessions they made to the Saudi authorities. Lucy McLaughlin and Deborah Parry are accused of murdering an Australian nurse, Yvonne Guilford, at a hospital in Dhahran last month. Jackie Rowley reports.
16 days after their arrest, Lucille McLaughlin and Deborah Parry had their first meeting with their lawyers. Afterwards, the combined British and Saudi team said the women had retracted confessions to the Saudi authorities, which the women insisted they had made in exchange for certain assurances.
They said that they had made these statements to the police partly out of fear for their own safety and partly because they were promised that if they did so, they would be allowed to see the British council. And they would be sent home in over a very short period of time and would not be subject to prosecution in Saudi Arabia since they are not Muslim.
Both women denied killing Yvonne Guilford. Lucille McLaughlin said the last time she saw her was 3 weeks before her death. The Saudi authorities have insisted the British nurses will get a proper trial. Mr Al-Hajjalan, who is well known to British diplomats in Riyadh, believes officials will use the case to try to demonstrate that their system is fair. A British consul accompanied the lawyers to the prison and spent 10 minutes talking to each of the women. The Foreign Office says the Saudi authorities have cooperated well over access and it has no complaints, but it has not been told the date for a hearing. Jackie Rowley, BBC News, at the Foreign Office.
Health authorities in England are facing severe financial problems later this year after spending an estimated £153 million more than they have in their budgets. Labour claim the overspend could mean the NHS has to make cutbacks after the general election. Our political correspondent Lance Price reports.
An unexpected level of emergency admissions and an overall rise in patient numbers is being blamed for the overspend, which affects 2/3 of the health authorities in England. On top of that, there'll be the cost of the wages deal for doctors and nurses, yet to be agreed, and the money will now have to come out of next year's budget.
This isn't special pleading. I mean, the health service is very responsible. When we've had enough growth money, we haven't complained, we've got on with it. But there's no doubt this year that we had limited growth money, we had enormous increased pressures from patients, and that's why we ended up in this deficit position.
Ministers say that compared to the total budget for England of £35 billion, the overspend is fairly small. But the backbencher who secured the figures is predicting serious implications for the future.
What the Conservatives are doing by allowing the health authorities to overspend before the election is putting off the evil day and trying to hide the fact that their health policies, because of a huge administrative cost of running their health reforms, are going to lead to cuts in beds and services for patients.
There will be pressures on the staff who are there. There will be shortages of staff. There won't be all the beds we need to deal with the pressures of the winter. And there will be pressure generally on the health service, which will mean that people will wait longer for non-emergency treatment.
Ministers had hoped to defuse health spending as an election issue by promising year-on-year increases above the rate of inflation. The opposition parties say that's still not enough to meet the extra demands on the NHS, but it's a pledge they've so far failed to match. Lance Price, BBC News, Westminster.
Opposition leaders in the Serbian capital Belgrade are calling on protesters to block the city with their cars tomorrow in an effort to increase pressure on President Slobodan Milosevic. Yesterday, he recognised some opposition victories in local elections, which the government had annulled. International observers say they won them all. From Belgrade, John Devitt reports.
These are the new councillors in the town of Zrenjanin, opponents of President Milosevic, who for the last 8 days have only been able to take up their new jobs by forcing their way into the council offices and staying put day and night. But now they're official. Zrenjanin is one of 3 towns in the country where Mr. Milosevic has just accepted an opposition victory. That's given some encouragement to the protesters in Belgrade after 7 weeks of protest. But maintaining the demonstration's momentum is becoming a challenge. Opposition leaders have called on people to drive every type of vehicle into the city on Sunday to cause a massive traffic jam. Mr. Milosevic clearly hopes these people will run out of ideas and stamina. In another apparent attempt to buy time, the authorities said they would rerun elections in the country's second largest city, but the opposition want the original result reinstated and won't take part. For them, time is of the essence and pressure from outside increasingly urgent. As the protests continue on the streets, it's hard to see what the international community can do to make Mr. Milosevic comply. The opposition don't want the reintroduction of full sanctions because they believe it will affect the general population more than the country's rulers. John Devitt, BBC News, Belgrade.
Japan says the Peruvian hostage crisis is now at its most serious stage yet. The Foreign Ministry spokesman in Tokyo said the dialogue between the rebels and the Peruvian government had reached an impasse. 74 people are still being held inside the Japanese ambassador's residence in Lima. This report from Bill Turnbull.
There's been no sign of negotiations here for 3 days, only fresh signs of frustration from within the residence, in the form of banners made of bed sheets unfurled by 4 rebels on the roof just before dawn. It's the latest chapter in a propaganda battle between the MRTA and the government here. Without dialogue, the rebels warn there can never be a solution. And today's Peru, 13 million in extreme poverty, where's the progress? It was a blunt response to President Fujimori, who in his latest speech had reiterated his determination to concede nothing. The Peru we all want, he'd said, would not be built overnight, and even less so with a rifle held to the head of a hostage. This new mood of confrontation will do little to lift the pessimism expressed by the Japanese government, which now believes the situation is more serious than ever. In turn, Prime Minister Ryotaro Hashimoto is adamant that Japan has no intention of paying any ransom. Bill Turnbull, BBC News, Lima.
Here, a man died today trying to rescue his dog from a frozen river in Leicestershire, and it's feared another man is dead after an almost identical incident in Ireland tonight. One hospital in the south of England has cancelled all non-urgent operations because of the influx of patients with injuries related to the weather.
With temperatures remaining well below zero, the River Soar in Birstall claimed one of the weather's latest victims. Tony Page was trapped under the ice for 40 minutes after going to the aid of his dog. Paramedics managed to resuscitate him, but he died later. An almost identical tragedy near County Galway in Ireland tonight, which it's feared has killed a young man, and the deaths last week of 2 people trying to save a Labrador, prompted the emergency services to repeat their warning to pet owners.
Do not, under any circumstances, walk on the ice. If you're taking a dog for a walk, I'm a dog lover myself, put the dog on a lead. Again, it's another tragic accident, in which there have been too many.
Hospitals treating a range of injuries, mostly broken bones caused by people slipping on ice, are being stretched to the limit. At St Richard's in Chichester, all available staff have been recalled. Operations have been hit too.
All non-urgent have been cancelled. It's the urgent, the patients with carcinoma that might need surgery on Monday. We're now toying, should they be coming in? That's how severe the situation is.
The bitterly cold weather also claimed the life of an elderly Isle of Wight woman who froze to death on her doorstep wearing only a nightdress. But even though ice is still a foot thick in parts, like here in Norfolk where a tanker became trapped, forecasters say the worst is over. John McIntyre, BBC News.
A Scottish climber who survived a 1,000-foot fall has been winched off a mountainside in the Highlands. David Farker was saved by a strap on his rucksack, which lodged in a crevice and broke his fall.
Help on the way for a climber who's made one of the most remarkable escapes of the winter. High in the hills above Glencoe, a Royal Navy team is called to pick up David Farker, who fell down this mountainside, bouncing and tumbling for 1,000 feet. As he lay with a broken arm on the edge of a cliff, other climbers used a mobile phone to raise the alarm. Rescuers moved him to where the helicopter could reach. His life had almost certainly been saved when his rucksack broke his fall.
He's a very lucky man. Obviously he would have actually been tumbling down the side of the hill, but it's more really how the casualty comes to a stop that affects their condition. This gentleman was very lucky in that his rucksack, one of the straps, had actually broken loose and had actually caught around a rock, and that's how it actually arrested his fall.
The snowball where David Farker lay was too narrow for the helicopter to land, so he had to be winched clear, then flown to hospital, After a fall, rescuers said he was fortunate to survive. This is expected to be one of the busiest weekends of the season in the Scottish mountains, with up to 25,000 skiers and 60,000 climbers taking to the hills. Colin Blaine, BBC News, Glasgow.
Now, with news of the matches in today's FA Cup third round and the rest of the sport, here's Rob Bonnet.
There was just the one surprise result in the Cup today, a 3-1 defeat for Southampton of the Premiership at the hands of First Division Reading. Southampton ended the match with only 9 men after the dismissals of Francis Bernali and Robbie Slater.
Bottom of the Premiership, Southampton certainly need to concentrate on the league. Now they can, though defending like this doesn't augur well. James Lambert, the man to profit from dreadful dithering. Southampton equalised early in the second half, but almost immediately Darren Caskey struck to restore Reading's lead. Their victory was sealed 12 minutes later when Trevor Morley clashed with Francis Bernali in the Southampton penalty area. Bernali was promptly dispatched to the dressing room for illegal use of the elbow. Morley duly dispatched the penalty. And the controversy didn't end there. Right at the end, Robbie Slater was involved in a touchline altercation with a linesman. Words were exchanged, with the referee having the final one off. It was all too much for the Southampton manager Graham Souness, who remonstrated with the official at the end and may well have some explaining to do to the FA. Kevin Geary, BBC News.
Elsewhere, Hugo Porfirio saved embarrassment for West Ham with an equaliser after Wrexham had taken an early lead. John Hartson's goal wasn't enough to take Arsenal through against Sunderland, and Liverpool scraped past Burnley thanks to a goal from Stan Collymore. 2 Premiership sides did score heavily, though. Fabrizio Ravanelli got 2 and Middlesbrough 6 against Chester, and Richie Humphries also scored twice as Sheffield Wednesday put 7 past Grimsby. And a Kevin Francis goal for Birmingham helped remove Stevenage, the only non-league side in action today. In Scotland, Eric Bow Anderson got Rangers winner at Hibernian as they maintained their 14-point Premier Division lead over Celtic, who also won, thanks in part to George Cadet. He got 2 in their 5-0 thrashing of Motherwell. Rugby Union and Leicester have reached the final of the European Cup with a resounding victory over the holders Toulouse. They overwhelmed the French side by 37 points to 11, scoring 5 tries in the process.
After a year dominated by politics that many supporters of English club rugby would prefer to forget, the New Year's message sent out by Leicester was filled with glad tidings and rich promise for the future. Toulouse, reigning European and French champions, were still in the Christmas spirit. Castagnere's wayward pass gifted Leicester the opening try, leaving Steve Hackney clear to run unchallenged to the French line. It was a lead England's only remaining survivors in the competition never looked like losing. Leicester's second try needed no such generosity. Will Greenwood set up Neil back, and with less than 20 minutes played, the home side had a 14-point advantage. At last, Toulouse began to play to their true potential, placing pressure on the Tigers' increasingly desperate but determined defence. Cazelbou dived for the line, but was held up by John Liley. The French fared little better in the second half, and as time ran out and ill-discipline set in, Leicester, with 2 more tries in the bank, could afford to display the flair and pace more commonly attributed to their opponents. Toulouse's last-minute exertions provided little consolation, a try rounding off a match in which they'd been convincingly outplayed by the English league leaders.
We came out steaming. We weren't going to be intimidated by sort of 10 internationals against us. Bob tried to get our game plan going early doors, seemed to work well. 5 tries to 1 against a French side. We'll take that any time.
Leicester will now meet the winners of tomorrow's match between Brive and Cardiff in the final. James Pearce, BBC News.
Meanwhile in Dublin, a win for Italy over Ireland by 37 points to 29, despite an early second-half advantage to the Irish as Jonathan Bell completed a kick-and-rush try. But it was the only time Ireland crossed the Italian line, and Italy clinched the match late in the game with their 4th try, scored by fly-half Diego Dominguez, who also kicked 7 successful goal attempts for a match total of 22 points. Britain's #1 tennis player Tim Henman has reached his first final on the ATP Tour by beating the Moroccan Hisham Arazi in the Qatar Open in Doha. Henman had reached today's semi-final without dropping a set in the previous rounds and won today's first set by 6 games to 3. But he then lost his rhythm in the second set, losing it 2-6 before taking the third 6-2. His place in the final after 7 previous semi-final failures represents the early fulfillment of one of his major ambitions for 1997, and his world ranking of 29 will improve to 23 or better, depending on tomorrow's result. And in the final, Henman will play the former world #1, the American Jim Courier. He beat Sergei Bruguera of Spain 6-4, 6-2 in today's other semi. Mike.
And the main news again, loyalist paramilitaries have threatened a full-scale return to violence in Northern Ireland if there are any more IRA killings there. That's all from the newsroom. From Rob and me, good night.
Good evening. Though it is going to remain cold over the next few days and nights, I think we may have seen the back of the very coldest of the weather now. Having said that, Tulloch Bridge saw -11 Celsius, just 12 degrees Fahrenheit first thing this morning, and it stayed well below freezing all day. And I think the Western Highlands again seeing the sharpest of the frost tonight, though just about all inland areas having another frosty and in places of course icy night. Just around the coastal fringes, the temperatures perhaps staying a touch above that freezing mark. And the clearest weather tonight likely in western Scotland, maybe clear spells in Northern Ireland, so these regions most likely to see some mist and freezing fog patches. Elsewhere a good deal of cloud, and that will lead to a little bit of flaky snow in a few places. Now for Sunday, cloudy across the south and the east, brightening up just a touch maybe away from the east coast, where along the coast itself there could be a little bit of sleet. Inland 1 or 2 light flurries of snow. The brightest weather out here across the west, but another cold and chilly day. And that's how it looks just now.
Well, now, before our film on BBC Wales on 1, an update on tonight's draw for the National Lottery. And the winning numbers are confirmed as 11, 13, 14, 27, 40, 41, and the bonus number is 23. Early indications are that there are 10 jackpot winners, each collecting just over £1 million.
Sunday evening on BBC One. Unwraps at 7:15 with the Antiques Roadshow. New arrivals for Dervla Kerwin and Stephen Tompkinson at 8 as Ballykiss Angel returns.
Happy birthday, Assumpta. What? This is your birthday present.
And looking for love or money at 10 to 9 is Michael J. Fox.
You name it, I can get anything.
You won't strike a better deal than with BBC One this Sunday.
An outcast in a brutal world.
Ivanhoe is dead. I've been living like a leper, accused of treachery to my king.
Down.
You will marry Athelstan, and you will sit at my table tonight.
But not out.
I will not rest nor come back to this house till I face the man who has destroyed my honor.
One man's fight for justice in a war against oppression.
You go to risk your life. Beautiful woman. Let go your hold on me, sir.
The truth shall die. Ivanhoe begins 12th of January on BBC One.
Revealing and candid to mark his 50th birthday, David Bowie talks to Alan Yentob about his 3 decades in music and film. That's on BBC Wales on 2 in 45 minutes. Thoughts of Murder on BBC Wales on 1 in the film premiere. And it just goes to show when you've got it all, there's often something missing.